You're good.
Perfect. Okay, I will go ahead and get started. Good afternoon and welcome. Today is Wednesday, April 10th, 2024, and this is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Town Council Communications Committee, and it is 4:03 p.m. Let the record show that in attendance are myself, April Seither, John Anderson, as well as Councilor Don Cushing. And item 3 is approval of the minutes from March 13th, 2024.
Second.
Perfect. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? So that is unanimous. Item 4 is a discussion of authors and topics for upcoming Counselor Corner articles. We did have a submission from Don Hamill for the April 15th e-news article and spot in the leader. I had made some editorial suggestions, as I typically do. It's not uncommon for counselors to submit their Counselor Corner article to me and ask for editorial support or just to fact check it and make sure that everything is right. So I had submitted a few comments to Don. We went back and forth a little bit. The end result is that his preference is to run it at pretty much as is. And so that submission is in the queue. I think moving forward, it opens up the conversation as we talk about developing a policy about what we really want the Counselor Corner piece to, whether we want to be more prescriptive in what it is, whether or not we want to set topics, things like that. Because I know that part of the discussion that we were having was that we really wanted to be more strategic in our messaging. And so I know that we had been pretty deliberate with choosing authors and topics to align with what was happening, you know, at the broader level. And Councillor Hamill had originally wanted to write something about coastal resiliency. That was what he had pitched to me, which I brought to you guys. And that's not the topic that he chose. And it's on the budget, so it's relevant. But I just think as we move forward and we talk about what this project, this side project of the communications committee looks like, that might be something that we incorporate in our discussion.
That raises a question.
Yeah.
That we have a discussion here and that we choose some topics that we think are relevant. And then we ask people to write about those topics or suggest topics which we talk about. And dare I say that these Counselor Corner articles are hybrids in the sense that they are a reflection to some extent of the general sense of the council, while at the same time the opinion of the individual. But for my money, if you want to express purely your personal opinion, write a letter to the editor. And I think that the fact is that that any one of us could, you know, essentially comment on the budget process at any time we wish to. We could call up and say to the reporter, "You want to interview me? I'm happy to share my point of view." But I find we need to figure that out, because I can tell you without even reading it, the Councillor Hamill's point of view on the budget does not necessarily reflect mine. And I have a problem with essentially carving out space and just saying, do your own thing. Be careful what you wish for.
And there have always kind of been, as long as I've been on the council, there's always kind of been two, you know, sides of that same coin, which are, you know, we want the council to have the opportunity to be able to put something in the paper that reflects their opinions on a topic. I have been more on leaning towards the side of let people say what they want to say. This is, to me, this is kind of the origin of this column, was just so that council, you know, had a little bit more interaction with the public. And then it kind of, over time, in my opinion, evolved into more of an informative piece.
Mhm.
And as that happened, we saw that as an opportunity to hone in on certain topics and to make sure that, you know, or to ask that the author please include the following information. We made it so that people would know about upcoming events. And so, you know, over time, it has kind of taken this long winding road, and sometimes because we've never set any clear boundaries or guardrails around it, sometimes, you know, that other side of the coin shows up and we say, okay, well, this wasn't necessarily what we had been doing, but we don't have any rules in place that say otherwise. And so,
I'm certain because we don't have a communication policy. That anything goes. And until we fix that, anything will go.
Mhm.
So my suggestion is before it's my turn again, we should fix it.
Yeah.
and I will say, just as a reminder to the public, you know, we do have the little disclaimer on the bottom that, you know, says that it's the views and opinions of the author and not the full council. But that, again, that might be something that we want to talk about as a committee.
I mean, I think it's,
forward in
yeah,
this space. And I'm going to interrupt you, John, just so that I don't forget. I updated the full council the other night, but just to update this group, I have been in contact with Drew Johnson, and it seemed like initially we were going to lose our print space in the Leader. They're restructuring and they're going to have more staff-driven content. Allison and I both emailed Drew almost immediately saying we find this, our residents find so much value in having these pieces. And so, you know, we kind of each made our own strong arguments from our perspectives on why we should get to keep our spot. And Drew responded to me a couple days later saying for the time being that we're going to keep our spot. And so we have, he set the expectation that we try and keep it to 600 words, which is sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. But I told him we could certainly meet that expectation. And just in terms of submission, if we can get it to them on a regular cadence so they know that it's predictable. But for the time being, we are going to be able to keep our print spot.
And part of that too is because the Leader is going to be doing their own email newsletter, which we've seen already come about. But he offered us to be able to have it in there still, but not in print. And while that is good that it's reaching their audience, it's not helping us with the people who only access it in print. So I'm glad that he was able to.
Oh, very, very grateful for the time being. And so, you know, for us, like, I want to be really good. Like, I want to make sure, like, I feel like we got to really prove ourselves now and hold on to this spot and make sure that you know, I promise everybody that we're going to have an author, we're going to have, you know, it's going to meet their deadlines, and I'm going to get those submitted to them on their timeline. Because I just think that spot is really important and I don't want to lose it.
Okay.
So for May 1st, we had talked about Counselor Shoup doing one on the budget from her perspective as a member of the Finance Committee. And so I already had that penciled in. And then May 15th, open to suggestions.
Well, my thought is until further notice, it's your turn. I really don't see any point in taking time here to assign suggested topics when any one of us can ultimately say it's my turn and do what I want. So my suggestion is that it would be nice if Karen shared her point of view on the budget. But my strong feeling is it's one way or the other. Pick a slot. Okay, if what we're really saying is we trust your judgment, that you'll be able to go out there and talk about something that's important to the public and do it in a way that won't reflect badly on the rest of us. Period. That's mine.
well,
And then when we get a policy, we'll work it out and the council votes on it and sets rules. I mean, I read the rules that we have that you sent, I think what
Yep.
that is, but you know, they're pretty detailed. They tell you when you can raise your hand for this, when you can't sit down for that, and so on and so forth. And yet they are silent on a lot of very big picture stuff that matters significantly. So one of my observations is that there are many, many important things that are a function of tradition, historical practice, that sort of thing. And a case in point is the role of the chair and the assistant chair in this notion of leadership. I can't find that in any ordinance. So I'm not complaining, I'm not saying it's a bad idea. What I'm saying is something as important as what are the roles and responsibilities specifically of the two people who are appointed by the council to interface as our representatives to management ought to be spelled out. And I don't know if that should be in the communication policy or it should be, what's the title of the policy?
And they are, the roles and responsibilities of the chair are spelled out in our,
Yes, that it
chapter
convene the meeting.
two.
I mean, that's fundamentally what it says, is that the chair's responsibility is to convene the meeting, and if the chair's not there, then the
Yeah.
assistant chair. And my understanding of convening the meeting says, meeting, you know, pledge allegiance, let's get started.
Yeah.
End of discussion. So, again, I'm not complaining about that, but I'm saying that I feel very strongly that we need to start turning our attention to memorializing things and discussing things that are important. Or not. Because where we stand right now, based on the feedback we get from the community, some as recently as yesterday to me, is that people don't trust us and they're not listening. Okay. Now, maybe we should begin to think about how we communicate in a way that is directed at changing that perception, because we are listening and we are trusting. Okay, so there's a disconnect. So all of our communication policies heretofore have led to the fact that the people are suspicious of the governing body of their town, in my opinion, without good reason. That's a communication problem. So, sorry to get on my high horse here, but.
I think we're gonna solve that, right?
Uh,
Later in
well,
our.
We're trying.
Yeah.
Well, yes, well, I hope so, but my,
Yeah.
my point is that my point regarding Councilor Corner is let's address the big issues, get into policy and set that aside. And now, until we do that, then let's just rotate through the list and let people write all what they think are important to make sure that 600 words meets the deadline.
I mean, I feel like people generally like suggestions, so I don't have a
Yeah.
problem saying it's Karen's turn and would be great if she could write on the budget, because
Yep.
she's on the committee and it's
Sure.
relevant, so. I think that one sticks, and then who's next on, like, who would be next on the cycle that hasn't written in a while?
I don't know off the top of my head. Nick,
Nick and Jean Marie haven't written.
I think
'Cause I
Jean
know-
Marie did one in February.
Didn't
Nick
she
do
do-
Nick did a chair.
Yeah,
report,
I don't
in
think,
the
yeah,
beginning
Nick
of the
did
year.
council goals at the beginning of the year.
So have you done one?
Yeah, one was,
Yep, I did a community survey one.
and
Okay,
you did a communication one.
so Karen is really up next.
Yeah, oh, definitely.
And then after that, it's like we're starting back at the
Yeah,
beginning.
yeah.
So maybe good for Nick to see if he wants to do one on the 15th. And again, he's probably got more exposure to what's happening to like think through. We won't have the budget second read by then. I don't know if there's any other major stuff that you guys have been talking about that's worth suggesting.
Oh, is it once a week, once a month?
Bi-weekly.
Bi-weekly.
So twice a month.
Mhm.
So we could do 4 on the budget.
You could do one, I mean, we could just keep
Yeah.
it on the budget topic, it just, and you can
Because,
give us a perspective.
because it's going to be, you know,
Mhm.
before, during, and after.
And right towards the
So-
end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he'll have the benefit of the workshop and the public hearing and all of that leading up to the vote. So I think that's a good one.
The reevaluation notices should be going out mid to late May, so that's also,
That might be
Timely.
another,
or
maybe you
paired
can
with the
mix the two
budget, yeah.
topics.
Sure, I can talk to Nick about that.
And then end of, or do we need to go as far as the end or no?
We do not,
So we'll meet before then.
because we'll meet before to do June 1. Okay. Item 5 is budget communications. And one of the things that I wrote down specifically on the agenda is to talk about the themes and the messaging. And so maybe not so much emphasis on the calendar. I'd like our initial discussion to kind of be on what we view and what staff views as our emerging themes this year.
You want me to pull this up, Allison?
Is that, yeah, that's the one I emailed you this afternoon.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you, guys.
Sorry, let me just,
Do you guys think we should be emphasizing?
Is that what they?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're,
Okay.
we have some direction of how we've been going. Last month, I showed this calendar, but I showed it from last year, so this one is updated. We don't need to go through it specifically, but it's just a visual showing of when the meeting dates are occurring and then when there are opportunities to communicate out in the newsletter or the leader. And then the bottom also just lists out those meeting dates and the budget roundtables. Liam, will you chime in with me
yeah,
here?
yeah, yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah, 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 totally.
So in talking through the budget, we talked about this last month too, but just going into more detail about kind of beyond that overview point. Most of the talking points that we're gonna be putting out are about how it's a level services budget. It's different than years past, and in the sense that it doesn't really cover as much on council goals or responding to community needs, but the majority of it is more on just maintaining the services that the community has come to expect, just the standards. And kind of referencing the survey in the sense of what the levels of satisfaction were on those and just being able to maintain that. That said, there's going to be a cost associated with those investments, so we'll get to those points. And then some of the other messages are kind of diving into that in more detail around staff retention, facilities maintenance, and pointing out certain areas like town hall, the repairs that are needed in town hall. Staff retention would be about collective bargaining and public safety and in public works. Getting into specifics around vehicle and equipment replacement, which we've done in the past. But our approach is going to be a little bit different than the past couple of years because in the past, we've kind of just taken items in the budget, projects that are happening, and highlighted those and had a department head speaking to them. This time, we're going with the approach of the topic and the thematic elements of the budget and making videos or content around those. And then kind of like pulling out a few just different awareness pieces, but not so focused on that. Yeah, and then the bottom one's just a couple items that are in there that don't really follow along with the level services. The new body worn cameras that police is getting, we want to emphasize that before it goes to potentially referendum in November. And then just some other community investments that are responses to the survey. So those are mainly the messages, and we're also outlining these as a way to think about like what videos we can create, because we've done that each year too. And then articles that are associated with it and getting them in all the channels that we normally do.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a great summation. I think that the messages, to your question, it's really, again, this is a term that you keep on hearing over and over again, level services. And it's really intended to be suggestive of the fact that again, years past, we always highlight these new investments, new initiatives, new services, new positions. And sort of the status quo is taken for granted and not at the forefront of our messaging. I think this year it's really important to highlight, given some of the challenges of this year's budget, which are again well-trodden territory at this point with the commercial residential revale shift, with the loss of the state program, and just, I think there's always a lot of pressure on keeping the tax rate down. We really wanted to emphasize that we're not asking for more. We're not really asking to do new things. We're just looking to really solidify what that level of services that we provide now. So staff retention, we're not proposing add staff, we're proposing to keep staff. That does require, given a contract year, a significant investment. So it's going to cost more, but it's not expanding services. Facilities maintenance, again, is about maintaining the existing facilities we have. as Allison suggested, there's some pretty significant maintenance with a now 31-year-old town hall. Again, that's a one specific area. And then vehicle equipment replacement. Yes, there's a fire truck on the ballot. That's to replace an existing fire truck that's largely met its end of life. And then where there are new investments, we've been very, I think we've exercised, I don't want to say exercise restraint, but been very deliberate. Body worn cameras would be a new investment. That's a level of, I guess, transparency we don't have now. I think, without getting into too much in the details, we're one of two Cumberland County agencies that don't have one or the other or both. And then the community investments, where again, we have outside of the body worn cameras, other areas has really intended to be responsive to that feedback we're getting through the survey. So it's a very deliberate traffic improvements, whether it's really intersection improvements, some master plans that have some traffic components to it. And again, environmental, which continues to be a strong component of what the community suggests is important to them. So that's sort of the broad framework and messaging, again, with some themes and trends. So what we're gonna drive home is level services. To just boil it all down.
I think it's important. And you kind of hit on it, but I think this is what I would like to see more as like the lead to the public, which is we understand this year is unique. We understand that there are things outside of our control, and the only thing in our control is the budget. And because of that, we're deliberately trying to go forward with just level services. But I think, to me, the message to the public is more, we understand what's coming. There's uncertainty that we can't predict and tell you exactly what it's gonna mean for your tax bill. And because of that, we are, both on the school and the town side, I think, have deliberately tried to show restraint with level services as their target and retaining staff. Some of the other stuff below, like I'm a little less personally interested in like details about facilities, equipment, like those are to me sub bullets under level services to some extent.
Oh, level services is the broad theme, and then staff retention, facilities, and vehicle are kind of three prongs of that, is what I would sort of suggest.
Yeah.
And then off of that, vehicle replacement is one of the referendums, and then you get into body worn, and then you have the other kind of cogs down around traffic improvements. Yep.
I think it's also important that we communicate the council's recommitment to our goal, that even though what was proposed was what was provided, at least I think we all went on the record saying that we're committed to get there, which may mean it could put some level services at risk. And I don't know if I would go so far as to say we all accept that, but I feel like, speaking for myself, like if getting to that goal means some level services are at risk, I'm okay with that because of what I anticipate could be a challenging year for some residents. So I don't know if that's a message we lead with, but I feel like we all said 5% is important, and retaining our workforce is the top priority.
This is where I guess just for conversation, I wonder if there is a distinction between council communications and
that's fair.
messaging and staff, right? So now this budget's been delivered and presented to the council. What you want to do and what's important to you, I think is part of the council messaging. I think what we're trying to message is what was presented
Okay.
and why. And I think it's probably not staff's place to say, and we think, or would suggest council impact level services to be, I mean, I certainly think, the
Yeah.
messaging though that you identified there around, we understand this is a challenging year, has some uniqueness to it. We've tried to do some of that. We can certainly reiterate that. And again, some empathy for and understanding
Yeah.
around there's an impact here that we don't really know, and there's some uncertainty, and we're trying our best to account for that. I think those are extremely well taken points.
Can I bring up a point that I'm having a little bit of struggle with, so I imagine other people are. When you guys say it's gonna be a challenging year, or it's going to, people are facing uncertain circumstances, like, and then I forget unique,
Yeah.
that's the one.
Yeah.
Like, can we define what that means to us? Like,
Yeah.
do we have a unified message on what those circumstances
Yeah.
are, or what that word unique means? Because to me, if you don't know the revow, like, if you're not concerned about the revow, or if you haven't experienced, obviously, but like inflation, like, is that what we're talking about? Like,
What I-
Well, I don't even know, based on what Wayne said, if we are talking. And what I mean by that is that what I understood you to say is we presented the budget, this is our explanation of it. These are the things we're gonna put up. And I'm not being critical at all.
Mhm.
What I heard John say is reflective of what a sensitivity to the public's concerns, separating the language.
Mhm.
You know, if I were to frame it, is to say, with respect to the budget, we are listening. This is what we understand about the collective circumstances of people in the town. In one, in two, this is why we've been conservative and established this goal, which we are attempting to adhere to.
Yeah.
And if we do that, we will continue to be able to give you the value of your tax dollar and move past initiatives forward, which is what federal services does. That's the message. The problem is that none of us here are authorized to send that message. Okay, and that's, we keep coming back to a fundamental issue is that I say to you, Lee, draw an X through that. I want you to bang away on the three things that I've just said. Well, you know, the first thing that I do if I were you is I go back and say, Tom, Cushing's off the rails in there. He's in our lane. He's telling us to do all of this stuff. And yet, I flip back to our last discussion, which is to say, we can't get one counselor to sort of stay in the tent and say, can we collectively address these things? So the only way that we can do what you're saying is go back to the Wednesday night meeting and say, this is what the communication committee wants to say to the town consistently. Motion, second, hands up, down.
Yeah.
And that is a fundamental structural problem with our town government, which unless we address, okay, then you will do, you know, it's a dichotomy because if Tom stood up and said, well, there's a vacuum here and leadership abhors a vacuum, I'm going to fill it. And not only am I going to be the chief administrator of this town, but I'm going to stand up and start leading on some messages. He could do that, but I can promise you that his board of directors would be turned around, but what are you doing? Okay, so that's kind of illustrative of what the issues, because I would like to say all of the things you're saying, because those would help people understand that we are really doing what they wanted us to do.
Mhm.
Okay?
Well-
And the best we can do now is suggest to you folks that might be that this could, in one interpretation, be as Shakespeare once said, thou doth protest too much. As you know, after a while, if you do too much splaining, okay, the people begin to say, yeah, you lost. Okay, period.
Yeah.
That's
So I mean, I think that's the purpose of why we're meeting as a communications committee to some extent is to give our guidance as they go. Like I think you're right, and maybe you said it that your job is to communicate information, and what we're bringing to the conversation is considerations that help you with your messaging. I think showing that empathy, and maybe to your question about what's unique, I think that's factual, right? There's unique things this year that don't happen often that make it hard to do things that we traditionally do. So when I think of it being unique, I think fundamentally, typically at this stage, or when we approve the budget, we can say everybody's taxes are going up 3%.
There it is. An example of a uniqueness to this budget.
Yeah.
We're not divulging a mill rate,
Yeah, and we
and
can't.
we can't, and here are the reasons.
And the reality is each person's tax bill is gonna go up based on what we approve in this budget. Plus if they were included in that state program, plus whatever the result is of the revow. So that to me is like, we can't go out there confidently and say everybody's taxes are going up 3%. All we can say is what's staying the same this year is we're sticking to our tradition of trying to keep spending low So that way we know that there's predictability in the tax increase. But again, there are situations where, as much as we're trying to keep the budget low, depending if your house, because of the market conditions, all of a sudden jumped up, your tax bill is gonna look different this year. And so that's what I mean when I say unique. It's like there are circumstances that we can't just do what we've traditionally done. And I think making sure people know, we know that, which is why we have a level services budget being proposed, because there was sensitivity, I think, on both the town and school side to try and keep this year as predictable as it can be in circumstances that are outside of our control.
Yeah, I think, I appreciate. I think one of the challenges is, again, one thing I tend to look at these things is what are the roles, right? So Tom's role is to propose a budget to the council. He can speak to his intentions and what he feels this budget represents and what the messaging is behind that. What happens once it's now the council's budget and what your intentions are and what your goals are, which are council goals, I think can have a different message. Now, as we've seen in 7 elected officials, we can say, we think this budget is representative of level services and is trying to be sensitive. We could have a councilor who says, I don't think it is level services, and I don't think you are being sensitive at all. And so I reject your messaging. I'm gonna go and write my own editorial that says, this is not a level service budget and is whatever. So I think there's only so much control over some of those aspects, but I think where there is commonality and where we can align on what the messaging is, that's something that I think I'm hearing from Councilor Cushing. Perhaps a policy would help facilitate that alignment of messaging.
Well, it would clarify roles. Okay, and one of the things that the council can, no, I'm not suggesting they do, when you come to what is the role of the communication committee, the council can delegate the supervisory responsibility relative to managerial communications to this committee. Okay, instead of us saying, gee, we're suggesting, we are authorized by the council to tell you that you need to do this. Now, and that, to my mind, the group may not want to do that. I'm not going to speak for anybody but myself, is to say that the issue is sort of fundamental to allow us to get things done in a way that does something very important for the residents here, which is to feel that we are we as opposed to an us or them. And if we behave like going us and that at the top level, then there's every reason for people to see. So, I don't have a concrete answer, is to say, and I completely take your point that you presented the budget and that from here on out, it is the council's responsibility to seek input from the community as we are doing, and that maybe the best thing that the town could do with respect to the budget is say, here it is, we presented it, here's where you read about it. We're not going to try to sell it to you. It's our best effort. If you want to, engage, show up at one of these meetings, write to your counselor. In other words, the communication effort shifts now to exactly what you said. We did our job. Okay. Now it's your turn, citizens, to do your job, which is to step up and give your elected officials input, which is at the point where we can convey the messages that you were speaking about. When we stand up in front of them and say, our job is to represent you, not to defend, we've given guidance to you guys and we work very hard to follow it, and we still have some work to do. So that's another very simple thing, is to focus the efforts on getting people in our meetings, getting people engaging on our email. Speak up is a message that the town could very well send, and put it on the townspeople to inform us as to whether or not they think a fire truck is important, or they don't know what level services mean or whatever.
Mhm.
So in part, Marie might be proud of you to listening, because she's the one who is often saying, well, people don't engage, they don't involve. And my challenge to the people is, this is your budget. Show up, pick up the phone, write an email, then read it, okay? So that's just another way of looking.
I mean, I agree with that. I think pushing all of this, all the call to action for every communication should be for the public to get involved and contact their elected officials and how to. But I do think there is a need to make sure that we simplify what's in there, something they can digest to get them to lean into it to do the work. And so I think you have to do some sort of like inform of like, this is what it is, this is
Totally.
what's in there.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what I'm taking away you guys are proposing. It's not persuasive or selling, it's, these are the facts that we want people to know about what's in the proposal. Now, it's up to them to come to us, and all these forms we have, and give us direction, thoughts, input, what they think, and again, if they don't do that, then we can only go by what the council
Yeah.
said.
The budget document is hundreds of pages, so I don't just expect to like put it out there and have people, the passive resident chime in and then engage. So that's why I think it's important to break it down, like emphasize the key points. And this is kind of more of a progression, doesn't really give it the scale, but the introduction and the level services piece, I think that is setting the stage, like what you're saying of establishing that empathy, showing why the budget was set up the way it was, and acknowledging that there are unique factors this year. I don't think we're not doing that at all. I think that's stage one. That's where we're at right now. So you might not see it yet, but we need to establish that direction, and then we can kind of break out these other points if people aren't gonna be scrolling through and reading the document themselves, but it kind of gets to that point of engagement. And I like what you're saying too about the call to action at the end of every piece of content, but I'm not just gonna put out the link to the budget document and say, come to a meeting. I think there's gotta be more to that.
And I think this year we are trying to be very deliberate in trying to set some expectations and speak about not just, so I think it goes beyond just informing.
Mhm.
I certainly, we're still a ways away from being persuasive. I don't think that really is staff's role. We kind of talked a little bit about that. But I think that we really, and so to hear some feedback from Councilor Seither that, uniqueness, I mean, I wrote an introductory budget article that went in the Leader, I think this week, that really tried to articulate some of the unique things that we have going on this year that makes it a bit of a challenge, and also level set. And so it's also one of those things where, Tom's gonna be, Allison's producing a video with Tom's kind of voiceover that kind of talks about, again, level services, goes through some of his budget slides. We're really trying to hammer home and define what level services mean and why, and talk about these pieces. But if it's not, it's one of those things where you can, lead a horse to water, but I think where we always struggle and fall down maybe is making it drink. And so we are trying to, from a staff standpoint, irrespective of the other conversation, to do some messaging. That's not just here are the facts, here's the information, here's the 400-page budget book. This is what we're trying to do. This is our effort.
Yeah.
So one of the things that should not go unnoticed in terms of what actionable things that we can do, messaging aside, is that part of our charge, I believe, is to make ourselves available. And so this budget roundtable, finance took the lead on this and got those scheduled this year, which is fantastic. And so I, as comms chair, try and make myself available to as many of those as possible. I've been in touch with Karen. She's willing to do a promotional video. John had said he would do a promotional video. I'm always happy to do one. When, in terms of the first one's on the 20th, when would you like us to start getting those materials to you?
So in the past few years, we've done a budget overview newsletter, and so I have that scheduled for next Thursday. It's the 18th. So ideally I could have it before then. Okay, which just it makes sense too, if the first one's the 20th, yeah, so sometime early, mid next week.
So what are our takeaways from the last discussion? Let's put it.
I guess I didn't get at the point too of, the webpage that we have set up, and Brian, the webmaster, has been working on that too. But that's gonna be fully developed and then breaking out some key points, so there is, I know we talked about the access to information, that is going to be there and readily available for people, and trying to get attention drawn to it, redirecting people there.
You know, I guess my advice with respect to the broad message is to make it very clear on the front end, what are we trying to accomplish and why? In a paragraph. And that, you know, and broadly, forgetting the terminology, is that what we are attempting to do is to continue the initiatives that we've started over a period of time. And that the associated cost increase with those things are the normal course of increases in expenses. What we're not trying to do is we're not trying to add stuff. What we are trying to do is replace things when we believe it would be less costly in the long term to replace things now as opposed to let them fall apart. I guess what are we trying to accomplish? And then in bite-sized pieces, here's how. So it's the fire truck, there's those bullet points. I would never use the term services. I have to look it up. Okay. And that, you know, for a while, I think still retain some of the perspective of an outsider. I've been immersed in this. I don't know.
Yeah, I can appreciate
I
that.
don't
Yeah.
know all the acronyms. And so I think to myself, my God, if I'm challenged with this stuff and I haven't been around it, what's my neighbor? So that would be that what I just described, I think, was the answer to the question, what is level services? But there's no need to use the term. You follow, what are we trying to accomplish? You know, I've said this in multiple documents. We are trying to hold steady in a stream that is pushing hard to move us backwards. And that does take some additional investment. Those are the kinds of, if I would broadly say, those are the themes. And I guess my other piece of advice would be bite size, attention span of maps. Same thing, same purpose, different example, over and over again.
I actually feel like what you just said feels like full circle from what you said at the beginning. So I actually think you guys are saying the same thing. I think the challenge is we're not, like, I think seeing it on paper, maybe this is a good lessons learned going forward when we do one of these sessions where we're talking about messaging, is like a 1-page draft of like, here's kind of information to look at. Because I think, again, when you went over your slide and what you just said, I personally feel like you guys said the same thing. And it took me a while to get there, but.
Well, I guess I was more reacting to, I hear all of that stuff. Strip away the terminology.
Yeah, that's important.
Simplify the message.
Yeah.
And use those bullet points as an example. And I will say that in the time that I've had the opportunity to work with the two of you, and I pontificate, I think you do a pretty good job of pulling it all within the value. And responding to that. Okay, so otherwise I wouldn't waste my time.
Yeah.
I think it might be a helpful exercise. Again, maybe it's not too late for this one, but in the future, because I do think that I'm hearing from both of you, putting kind of our messaging through a litmus test with, you know, what we're talking about here, and I'm happy to stand up and whiteboard level services. You can say, also, I don't know what that means. Help me let me try to translate what you just said, and let's go with that.
Mhm.
And that might be a helpful, you've heard Tom talk a lot about how he's too close to a lot of these things, so dumbing it down, a CEA is really challenging for him, because we also know so much, it's like asterisk after asterisk, we can't just say, I can't just say this is a level service budget and not get into, but there are some exceptions, so let me talk about the exceptions, and here's why I want to better define that.
Yeah.
So that might be a helpful role for the communications committee to fulfill as well, maybe in partnership with the finance committee, to say, okay, we gotta really, here, now the budget's the council's. What did you try to do? All right, now let's talk about how we communicate that to the community. Because staff does not always, if we provide, we're great at providing information, I think we're great at, and Allison's actually done that better than anyone.
Yeah.
Saying, help me, and has done a phenomenal job, but I think that there's,
Again,
still some opportunity.
it's always good to get some feedback, because again, I even think, for the revow communications, there was something Nick was communicating that even for me, I was like, that's like the word we use when we talk about stuff. But someone on the board read it and they had a different reaction
Mhm.
because they're not close to it, and they felt like it was really negative because the word was burden.
Yes.
And we're talking tax.
Shift the burden.
Yeah.
Yeah, the tax,
And so I thought like that whole conversation, and I think that's kind of what you're getting at, is like
yeah, it pitted.
the words we use sometimes
Yeah.
matter, and for us, because we're so close to it. We're like a little bit more immune to like the
Yeah.
connotation, and
Yeah.
so I appreciate. What you're saying of like, and I'm that way, like I'm very like black and white, like why do you care? The CIP, you said to me something, you're like, John, you're talking about the CIP, and I'm like.
I didn't say it at the beginning, but I was just like,
Yeah.
I've given myself acronym tests.
Yeah, so yeah, like speaking in plain language and
Yeah.
through the lens of what they care about is really what we should be communicating, and I think you do a great job doing that.
When Liam was first describing the budget to me as a level services budget, I was like asking him, like, did you make up that term or?
Which is funny because we use it on the school side since the day I got elected. That was how the superintendent at the time was, or Kate Bolton, who's been here forever, right? Like that was her way of saying, this is where we start every year with how do we open and close the doors? If we close the doors in June and we open them in September, we retain all of our same staff. That's our level services budget. So that honestly might be Kate Bolton.
Well, I've heard it so much in the past month that it's almost like a buzzword to me at
Yeah,
this point,
yeah.
like level service, it just like differentiates it from other years, like level services budget, like as long as we're like defining it and
Really
supporting
interesting,
it.
yeah.
I think of it as a good thing to keep using that term, because otherwise if you're just explaining it, you're losing people, but if you say like level services budget, like the more you repeat the
Fine, yeah,
buzzword, yeah. But,
I think I disagree. I think
I mean, yeah,
That's fine.
I only say that 'cause it's not an
I
acronym.
just don't see a need to hang terms on some shorthand for things that you can explain to people in a sentence. And that's why analogies, metaphors, those kinds of things are, acclaimed in literature because they help people understand stuff. So I say, just tell your grandmother what is it that we're trying to do. And you've heard me say this before, but my friend Stephen Fang, he's a forensic. Okay, he's put people in jail and analyzing financial statements, and when I handed him the town budget and said, could you make some sense out of this? He literally came back to my house with his hand, and he's a total nerd. He was all in kerfuffle because he's standing so. But I've been on that. I want to make one more point, and that is that some of these discussions might well have taken place and maybe should take place around annual council meetings where we collectively hash through this stuff like we did with the budget goals. And we have some of these conversations at that top level so that we do have a consensus, not only on what we are trying to accomplish, but the messages that we're trying to. And if we start the process there at the top, perhaps that will provide, there'll be no question about what is the will of the council, because we will have had our fights. We will have reached some consensus, and we will have raised our hands, and then it would be the will of the council.
That's an interesting idea. I mean, the entire school board attends those budget presentations.
Mhm.
Those first 2 days that the school board does theirs. And where you guys are using that format this year, we could discuss doing something where the full council attends. And then at the end of those meetings, they have some time, or they did when I was on the board, to break down and say, okay, what are the themes that you heard? What can we agree on for talking points? And then send those things to the communications
Mhm.
committee and to staff.
Right.
So that's,
And, what's interesting is that then there is a basis for the debate, in the sense that an individual counselor can say, well, I don't really see this budget as being reflective of what we collectively agreed to. Now there's a stake in the ground, there's a place for discussion. So maybe that's the,
I think that's what we tried to do at the last meeting, but I think people have to dig in to have I think what Tom does is like the Cliff Notes version.
Yeah.
And to your point, you have to hear what you have to dig in a little bit. And so I love the idea of, in the future, if we can get the full council committed to attend just the staff, the department session. And I think the reason why the more squished model works better is because then that's easier calendar wise. So like if we get those on the calendar in advance in the future, I think they should be required. We should all have to hear the same thing, and then
it's definitely something to
for next
talk
year.
about, yeah.
But I do like that concept for like other big decisions too, not just, like, to me, it's more like that's the purpose of a workshop is we have something. We got some information, let's debate and discuss direction. And then direct whichever committee, ordinance, whatever, what their thing is, like the whole. Gorham Connector to me feels like another example of something that. There's an opportunity for us as a body at an appropriate time to have a conversation. But right now it feels like the media and other people are saying Scarborough says X, Scarborough supports this, and I just don't feel like
well,
we've actually had the conversation.
yeah, I don't know if this is the time, but just.
Hold on, don't spiral into a conversation
Okay,
about the
not-
Gorham
not-
Connector,
No,
please.
I'm just saying as an example, it's like another example.
Let us go way over, and I need to. amend the agenda.
One more example is that the headline in the leader said we're 6.57% tax increase. Drew, if you're listening, you can answer my emails. And I think that's going to the path, but the issue is to say, here's the budget finance. The notion of the elected officials spending 3 or 4 hours on one topic, independent of having to vote on anything other than propose something that they can vote on the major issues that can go a long way. And even if when we sit around the table, sometimes people get hot and hear a little bit that there's potentially some tension on these issues because they're important issues. But if you stay in the room, at the end of the day, you come up with something better. And so transportation is important. I don't know anything about transportation. I'd love to hear my colleagues advocate for various things and have a conversation. Growth is another one, just to discuss the issue of the tension between no growth and what happens to your taxes. This is a 2.3% increase if we achieve our budgetary goal because of growth in our community. Right? It's an increase in the tax value before there's been any direction. And so if you don't like growth, you may have to like taxes, all things being equal. Those are important discussions then. Okay. And as far as I'm concerned, we don't need to get we get to the policy, the suggestion.
that's, we're not gonna get to it because I have another meeting at 5.
Okay. Well, can I make
Um,
one suggestion?
Yeah, well, can I make my suggestion, which is, I think. What I'm hearing from you, Dawn, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but. It kind of at the core of some of the struggles we're having as a committee in terms of direction, or even just setting the agenda sometimes, is not really having these fundamentals in place.
Mhm.
And so I think probably we can get through our very quick business at the top of the next meeting. And I would like to ask A&C if we can have a half an hour of their meeting. I think that should probably work. And let's plan on like a 90-minute work session in May for just policy development.
Mhm.
We'll hear from staff. We'll have some more time to review the materials that you sent. We can make edits and suggestions. And I think really try and spend a good chunk of time setting some, at least giving some foundation to these conversations.
Can I just say, like, for me personally, I feel like you had it in your thing, there's an elephant that we need to take one bite out at a time. I'd really like to figure out what those bites are
Yes,
and then
agreed.
attack them, like the whole counselor corner thing that we discussed.
Yep.
To me, that's something we can tackle quickly, get done, have it ready. I don't know if we need a full policy before we send it to council to say, this is our recommendation on this particular item. We're putting it in rules and policies for now or wherever. But I'd like to make it actionable
Sure.
and not spend a lot of time trying to get something perfect, but
Sure.
really pick some quick things that we can get quick wins on.
I agree with the suggestion I was going to make is. And each of us go through, digest that outline and compared to critique it and to propose what those bite-sized
Yes.
pieces might be and what the order.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Prioritize,
Yeah.
that'd be good.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, so we will tackle that at our next meeting. Do we have anybody online for public comment?
We do not.
Okay, there's nobody in the room.
Mr. Good.
And so with that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.